Welcome back to the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women. In Part 2, we dive into the stories of 8 more women serving life sentences. Some hold on to hope for a second chance, while others face the reality of never being released. Stay tuned for Part 3, where we'll hear directly from women sentenced for similar crimes. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. Deborah Huet was dating Leonard William Day in May of 1999 when she accompanied him to Boone County, Kentucky. Day and his employer, Mr. Walker, were working an extended job installing fiber optic cable. While in northern Kentucky, Day met up with his former girlfriend, Tanya Renee Ray. The two rented a separate hotel room. The next morning, Deborah called Mr. Walker and asked where Leonard was. A week later, Leonard called Mr. Walker, who had returned to North Carolina, and told him the hotel kicked him out for fighting with Deborah. Hotel employees found the room the two shared had been trashed, with broken glass and furniture tossed everywhere. The employees also noted that the walls in the room shared by Leonard and Deborah had been sprayed with either bleach or water, and the sheets on the bed did not belong to the hotel. Tanya Renee Ray was never seen alive again. Detectives investigated several leads for 2 years before they focused on Leonard and Deborah. In April of 2000, a roadside cleaning crew found most of Tina's remains in a dark blue garment bag at the bottom of a hill. The initial target of the murder investigation was an ex-boyfriend, Thomas Jansen. The investigation then pivoted toward Leonard and Deborah. The theory was that Huet stabbed Stevens in a fit of jealous rage, and that Leonard helped Deborah finish off the victim and dispose of her body. Leonard was tried first and convicted and is serving a 50-year sentence. Deborah was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment as recommended by the jury. In July 2012, 50-year-old Cindy at the time was arrested in Fort Smith, Arkansas, after authorities received reports of someone trying to buy pills. Cindy was found in the vehicle belonging to 89-year-old Jim Roberts of Marion. Mr. Roberts was found dead in his East Depot home July 16, 2012. Neighbors of Mr. Roberts said Cindy moved in with the elderly widower less than 2 weeks before he was killed. Kentucky investigators went to Fort Smith to interview Cindy. She told police that another man killed Mr. Roberts, claiming that the man hit Mr. Roberts in the head with a skillet. The statements and other evidence presented during a preliminary hearing in Crittenden District Court led to Cindy being charged with murder, first-degree robbery, first-degree burglary, tampering with physical evidence, and receiving stolen property. She was convicted in May of 2013 and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. On November 25, 1992, Stephanie was hiding in the back seat of a car, covering herself with laundry, while her co-defendant and best friend Suzanne drove to Paces Creek Elementary School. The women wanted to gain control of Scott Baker, Stephanie's stepson, so that he could spend Thanksgiving with his father. While wearing a black wig disguising herself, Suzanne went into the school pretending to be Scott's cousin and prevailed. School authorities let her take him out of class. After they entered the car and had driven away, Stephanie revealed herself. Sometime thereafter, Stephanie grabbed Scott by the neck and began to choke him. Mercilessly, relentlessly, and despite his struggle, she strangled him until he was dead. Suzanne continued driving, but allegedly made some feeble effort to have Stephanie stop the attack. After Scott was dead, the two women dumped his body in a hole in rural Laurel County. They later returned to the location where Stephanie decided to set the child's body on fire. Stephanie, 22 and pregnant at the time, denied killing the boy out of fear he would steal attention away from her child. Her husband, Donnie Baker, the boy's biological father, said he thought his wife of 9 months wanted his son out of the picture so their child would get all their attention. He said he knew of his wife's jealousy because she picked fights with him over the boy, but never knew it was this serious, though. He gave police a diary in which his wife allegedly expressed a wish that the boy were dead. Suzanne was indicted for complicity to commit murder, kidnapping, and misdemeanor abuse of a corpse. She was convicted of recess homicide, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse, for which she was sentenced to 25 years imprisonment. She was released in 2008 after serving 15 years of her sentence on good behavior. Stephanie was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and kidnapping, with the chance of parole after serving 25 years. She faced the parole board in October of 2017. They decided she will serve out her life sentence. She has no more chances at parole. Marilyn Haig was found on November 30, 2008, her 78th birthday, in her home on Red River Drive off Man-O-War Boulevard. She had been bludgeoned in her bed. Haig's granddaughter, Heather Renee McLaughlin, and McLaughlin's boyfriend, Dominique D. Lewis, were indicted on murder charges, burglary, and evidence tampering charges. Also indicted was Dominique Lewis's brother, David Wayne Lewis, on charges of burglary and evidence tampering. Police have said he was in the house when the slaying occurred, but they did not have evidence showing that he took part in it or knew that the slaying would occur. McLaughlin told the judge that she and Dominique planned the attack on Marilyn Haig because Haig had planned to bail McLaughlin's uncle out of jail, and McLaughlin had accused the uncle of sexually assaulting her. Carlos Enrique Haig, Marilyn Haig's son, was arrested on a charge of first-degree sexual abuse after McLaughlin told police he had fondled her while she slept. The charge was dropped more than a year after Marilyn Haig's killing. McLaughlin said she plotted to kill her grandmother after finding out that Carlos Haig would be staying at her grandmother's house, where McLaughlin had been living, while he was out of jail on bond. Her grandmother, with whom she had been fighting, had told McLaughlin to move out, she said. McLaughlin was not inside the home when Haig was killed, but she helped plan the attack carried out by Lewis. He pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When given the chance to speak at her sentencing after pleading guilty to all charges, Heather said, "I was really not in my own frame of mind during the time that this happened because I was suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome from sexual abuse that happened to me. I'm not this monster that the prosecutor is trying to portray me as." The judge was not swayed by her speech. Before handing down her sentence, Judge Scorsona said, "Miss McLaughlin, I was looking for some genuine remorse on your part. I pray that you will find that in prison." Heather responded by blaming her lack of emotion on the medication she was taking. Scorsone proceeded to sentence her for murder, plus 20 years for first-degree burglary and 5 years each on charges of tampering with physical evidence and fraudulent use of a credit card. She will be eligible for parole after 20 years. The burglary, credit card fraud, and tampering charges came after McLaughlin and Lewis stole Haig's credit card and charged $135 on it and buried evidence in plastic bags. Marilyn Haig's sister, Betty Haig-Yulin, said in her impact letter to the court, "Heather is shrewd and scheming and stops at nothing, obviously, to get what she wants. She knew Dominique, her boyfriend, would do anything for sex, so she used him to carry out her plans for the murder." No crime specifics were located for Peggy Ann Smith, but she is currently at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. Department of Correction records show that Peggy was convicted of a murder that occurred in July of 2002 in Fayette County, Kentucky on August 27, 2003. She was sentenced to a term of 50 years, which some would say is equivalent to a life sentence. She has gone up for parole 3 times in 2022, 2023, and April of this year, 2024. Each outcome resulted in the parole board sending Peggy back to prison for an additional 12 months. Her next eligibility date is scheduled for June 1, 2025. At that time, she will have served 22 years of her sentence. Peggy Mina had let her nephew Raphael Robinson live with her. On November 6, 2009, Raphael went to the home of 72-year-old Homer Carrender, where he robbed him of 3 guns and $3,000 in cash before he brutally beat and stabbed the elderly man to death. Robinson was pulled over by Somerset police because he failed to turn his headlights on. The police determined the vehicle he was driving was stolen. Officers went to the apartment where its owner Carrender lived to find out whether he knew his car had been stolen. They found Carrender dead. The police had recovered a knife and steel pipe they believe were used to kill Carrender. During their investigation, detectives discovered that Robinson had been living with his aunt, Peggy Mina, prior to the crime. Over the course of 3 interviews with Mina, detectives learned that Mina helped Robinson plan the robbery and gave him her car to use on the day of the crime. Mina admitted that she knew that Robinson intended to kill Carrender and that she believed that Robinson struck him on the head with a rifle. After the murder, Peggy instructed Robinson to throw the evidence of the crime into a dumpster behind her home. She was indicted on charges of complicity to murder, complicity to robbery in the first degree, complicity to burglary in the first degree, and theft by unlawful taking. Peggy pled guilty to those charges in exchange for the state not to seek the death penalty. the sentencing jury found the existence of aggravating circumstances and sentenced Peggy to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for complicity to murder and 20 concurrent years for each of complicity to burglary and robbery, both in the first degree. On September 6, 2006, Tanya Renee Ray was indicted for complicity to murder, first-degree burglary, and complicity to first-degree robbery in the murder of 38-year-old Lee Ford Johnson along with her co-defendant, Christopher Hackworth. Tanya gave a couple different statements to the police. She claimed an unknown man beat Johnson and then forced her to drive him to a trailer park. Afterwards, she told police that Christopher Hackworth was an ex-boyfriend of hers and that he had jumped out from behind the bushes and attacked Johnson. The truth was that both Hackworth and Ray attacked Johnson with a baseball bat in an attempt to rob him. The pair entered Johnson's apartment and stole a small amount of money and a few other items after the assault. Among the evidence gathered just within 12 hours of the investigation, the most damning evidence against the pair was a videotaped conversation about details of the crime. Ray and Hackworth were placed in adjacent interview rooms, and the two realized they could hear each other through the vents, a detective said. And while cameras were still running, detectives were waiting on word from crime scene processors. Hackworth and Ray began talking to each other through the vent. They had a lengthy discussion about the murder that had just occurred. Hackworth entered his guilty plea first. Ray initially rejected the plea but was encouraged to give it further thought. The judge told her that Hackworth had pleaded guilty. She was also given more than an hour to think about the offer and speak with her family. Ray changed her mind and pleaded guilty. Telling the court, "I consulted with my family and I think that this is the best thing," both were sentenced to life imprisonment with the chance of parole after serving 20 years. Melissa Sanchez was hanging out with her children's father, Houston Langford, and other acquaintances partying and shooting guns in the backcountry near Pineville, Kentucky on a July night of 2016 into the early morning hours. Witnesses at the scene said Melissa and Houston were playing Russian roulette with a gun earlier in the day. Later that night, Melissa and Houston began arguing about whether Houston lost the gun and whether he cheated on Melissa. Houston stopped the car, got out, and found the funds still on top of the car. He gave it to Melissa. The arguing continued about the alleged affair. Melissa told Houston while arguing, "I'll kill you." Melissa eventually got out of the car, pulled the trigger twice, but the gun didn't fire. She got back into the car, pulled the trigger 2 more times, and the gun fired, killing Houston from a gunshot wound to the neck. Melissa pulled Houston out of the car yelling for help, but the witnesses present said that Langford was obviously dead already. When police arrived, they found Melissa sitting next to her kid's father's lifeless body. She repeatedly stated that she killed Houston and continually asked the police to kill me now. Melissa was eventually indicted on a murder charge. She was convicted after a 3-day trial and a short deliberation. She was sentenced to life in prison on March 2, 2018.